the wheel of life just keeps spinning, and you have to start figuring out how to deal with issues. And most importantly, fill that block of time that was dedicated to your bad habit. In my case, that was 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. nearly every day. That's a challenge. And I tell you, when I just talking to other people at stop, the number one concern is that I'm just going to be so bored. There's no way. And so I was just at that point where, oh yeah, I was bored. And to this day, there's many times where, my phone's not ringing on Saturday night and I'm sitting at home with my dog and everybody else is having the time of their life. But I've just learned to realize, like, this is life. And if you are bored, learn something to do.
What is going on, everybody? Guys, welcome back this week to another amazing, very exciting episode of the Superhuman Life. As always, guys, I'm your host, Frank Rich. And before we dive into today's conversation, let me just remind you how incredibly grateful we are to have you here with us today. Guys, addiction, it's so close to home for so many of us, right? And I'm not talking today specifically about pornography addiction. I'm talking about drug addiction. I'm talking about alcohol addiction. I'm talking about addiction in general. Maybe it's not impacting you. Maybe it's not impacting your home, but chances are it's probably impacting somebody within the 5 closest, most important people in your life. It's just the sheer numbers, right? Just the data will prove and support this. So today's conversation, guys, we have a very important story of recovery. We have a very important journey through what ultimately recovery can be and how it can radically transform both our life, but how we can impact and be there for others. So on today's show, guys, I have none other than Jason Carter. Jason Carter is the author of the brand new book, To Hell I Ride, where he documents his remarkable story, incredible journey of 30 years of secretly keeping this addiction to himself, while being a father, while being a success out in the world, while being a loving husband. So he chronicles this battle of insecurities, booze, depression, with some really, really powerful parts throughout this story, guys. So a lot of this is just really highlighting and documenting his journey through recovery, kind of some life transformative moments, some moments where he actually heard God's voice and how this radically transformed his life. But cobbled up in the story, guys, there's so many key takeaways, right? Our ability to control our thoughts and not actually give into some of these temptations and triggers. The importance for recovery, the importance for understanding our circle and how we all have these crabs in our life. Guys, you definitely want to stick around for the crab story, because chances are there's somebody in your life that is a crab right now. And you need to understand what I mean when I say there's a crab in your life, guys. So I'm so excited for you to get into today's story. Definitely check out Jason's book, To Hell I Ride. We're going to link it down there in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, down there in the description box, make sure to pick up a copy of To Hell I Ride by Jason Carter. But without further ado, guys, let's get into today's conversation with the author of the brand new book, To Hell I Ride, Powerful Recovery Story, True Addiction Discovery, not addiction recovery, addiction discovery. So make sure to stick around and find out what that means, guys. So that's in today's conversation. Love you guys. Hope you enjoy. We'll see you on the other side. Jason, my brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Oh, thank you. It is great being here. And I do want to say that I watched a couple of your podcasts and I noticed you had an Atlanta Braves hat on and was wondering why the change. I'm not sure who that is right now.
That's an interesting question. So we're flipping the script here, and you're gonna open up with an intro. So I'm a hat guy. Like if you see me on the internet anywhere in a picture or video, 99.9% of the time I'm gonna have a hat on, and it's so much to the point that it's become like a symbol for me that there were people that knew me for years. We're talking 5-6 years, and then they saw me at an event that was more of a dressy, formal type of event, and they're like, "Frank, we didn't realize you actually had hair." So for one, the hat is not covering a bald head. I actually have a pretty wicked mullet. My hair is pretty thick. But the Braves, so this hat that you're looking at here currently, this is the Tampa Bay Rays, one of their minor league teams. It's the Charleston River Dogs. So I'm here in Tampa. I was born in Tampa, grew up in the 90s, which is pre the Tampa Bay Rays, even pre the Marlins. I mean, the Marlins came out in, I think, 92. So growing up here locally, we didn't have like the national TV broadcast that you have today. Like there's no Fox Sports, ESPN baseball maybe had one game a week. So our baseball, like our home team, if we were going to support anybody, was going to be the Braves. So it's close to my heart there as far as like a tie to the Braves, but I've obviously transitioned into more of a Rays. But I got all kinds of hats, bro. We got the Rays hat. We got Lions Not Sheep. I got some other really cool hats that kind of have some sayings and meaning behind things. So I don't know. I don't know why I selected this one today, but that's the story kind of behind the Rays there. Where are you at, Jason?
I'm in San Antonio, Texas. So we have no baseball team. We have to pick the Rangers or I guess the Astros. I grew up a Dodgers fan. I grew up in California, but I do love the Braves. I had a college buddy who was from Atlanta, and those games were on TBS all the time. So it could be Tuesday afternoon between classes. The next thing you're watching a ball game. And what's better than that?
Yeah, that team of the 90s, man. I mean, obviously everybody knows the Yankees, they're the powerhouse, the Red Sox. But I really felt the team of the 90s, 14 consecutive division championships, like they were really looked at as America's team, right? Like they had no real massive superstars. Everybody kind of came up through the farm system, incredible pitching staff. And obviously they had a lot of success, probably deserved to win a couple more World Series. But that's interesting. I've never literally started a podcast with the guest asking me a question. I really liked how that got started, but I'm incredibly excited to have you here today. Incredibly grateful for what you're doing and putting your story out there in the world. We were talking before getting started, how close to home, addiction or alcoholism is for everybody, right? It's like, maybe it's not directly in their home, but if you look at probably the 5 to 7 most important people in everybody's life, there's probably somebody in that circle that is struggling with an addiction or struggling with even alcoholism. So I'm really excited to kind of like walk through your story here a little bit, kind of get into why you wrote the book that you did called To Hell I Ride. So maybe the best starting point here, Jason, would be to start when did alcohol like actually even come into the picture for you? So let's talk about, when alcohol kind of made its way into your life, and then how did that lead you down the path of addiction? We'll kind of use that as a launching point here today to get into your story.
Sure. It came into my life at a very young age, not by drinking it, but by seeing it. My dad was a pretty healthy drinker in his own right, ex-Marine kind of guy, and he was my hero. And I have memories, pre-kindergarten memories of seeing him and his boys sitting around a keg or, going through a case of Budweiser, while we were on a bird hunt or something. And so I always just looked at alcohol as like, okay, this must be something cool to do. There's a lot of my identity that was wrapped up in trying to please my father, which I'm sure a lot of people have that. And I found that that's a pretty easy way to do. Now, when my parents got divorced, I believe I was in 3rd grade, and he stayed in California. I ended up in Texas, and we had all this distance. And when I would go out to visit him, starting in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, it was okay to drink beer with him, and that was a way that we connected, sitting on the porch or cooking steaks and drinking beer. And I just thought it was the greatest thing ever. And what I didn't realize is that I was putting so much of my own identity into that. It carried over. And as I got older, it just became easier for me to, instead of being like the superstar athlete and put in all that work, I could be the guy that could drink 12 beers, and still drive his car home. That was a little easier. And I think that depending on where you live, it's something that's so normalized and socially acceptable, the boys will be boys kind of thing. And so it wasn't until my mid-20s when I realized, what, this monster has a pretty long tail, and I don't really know if I want to think about it now. I could be an alcoholic, I could be addicted, but I just kept kicking the can down the road because most of the peers that I hung out with, that was just kind of the way it was. I felt tremendous remorse for pretty early on. Every time I was hungover, knowing that I could not do what I wanted to do that day, whether it was, go on a jog or do a really bang up presentation at work, I knew that I was weakening myself. I wasn't, I guess, insightful enough to realize all of the psychological scar tissue that was actually driving this, but it became something that was top of mind. I was never in denial. I never really thought, this is just the way it's going to be for a couple of years and I can stop anytime. I had just committed myself to you know what? I'll just be a hard worker and a hard drinker. And that's the way it is. Not really knowing that there was an alternative. And, like anything over time, this pushed through to, mid 30s, where there was one moment where I did quit. I was like, I've had enough. It was after a, typical vacation, drank too much, felt terrible, gained weight, looked awful. And I thought that would be the solution. And so for 9 months, I white knuckled it through, my normal waking life, started training for a marathon, all the cliched stuff, and realized that this is, I did not want to do this. I didn't want to not drink. I enjoyed it. You know, replacing your day by running 3 hours, to train for a marathon, that's not sustainable. That's not real change. Yes, I was very slim. I was in my best shape, but I was inside, I was just miserable. And it was really hard because nothing else around me changed much. The people stay the same, continue it with their own way of life. And so I just said, after about 9 months, you know what, to hell with this. I'm going to go ahead and start drinking again. So, we get into my 40s and, everything's great. I've got a beautiful wife, 3 kids, nice house, good job. But the weight of, starting every day, nearly every day, with, whether it's 3 glasses of wine or 2 bottles of wine on a Wednesday night, you're starting your day just dragging an anchor, So everything that you're doing, even if you're successful, you're just exhausting yourself to the point where, the end of the day comes, there's only one solution, and that's go straight to the bar and get a couple cocktails and get that going again. And, this goes on. I'm about 44 at this point, and fully aware that this is a problem. And it was getting, kind of worse, business trips and whatnot. And, I finally go to a psychiatrist because I was really concerned. And I told her my story, and, she was like, well, run me through a day of drinking, a normal day. And I kind of ran through a typical Wednesday, and she looked at me like, how are you alive? Do we need to, like, let me see your hand. Is it shaking? Have you had a drink today? And I'm like, it's 10 in the morning. No.
Can you share with us here, like, what, like, I mean, to kind of give the audience and myself here as well, like, what was a Wednesday like?
Yeah. So Wednesday would be, so after work, I would go to, we're members of this country club that's on the way home conveniently. So I'd kind of pull in there and go into the men's grill. And it was just normal to go get your grown man cocktail, but I would have 3 or 4. And, they pour them, um, probably one equals 3 or 4 at a real bar. So then I would, leave there about 7, go to the grocery store, and I would pick up dinner and also 2 or 3 bottles of wine because I'm such a great guy. I'm going to cook everyone dinner. So then that turns into just, slugging down the wine while I'm cooking after it's done. And then, our kids were at an age where we were kind of shuffling them up to bed around 8 or 8:30. And as soon as they were, the lights are off, I'm back down on the couch, finishing it off, whatever is left in the house, and to the point where, I don't pass out, but to the point where I'm like, I'm just, I knew exactly where I needed to be, that point A to B or A to Z, really. And nothing was going to stop me from getting to that point. And that just became exhausting. So, all in on a typical Wednesday, it could be the equivalent of, 10 shots of vodka and 2 bottles of wine. And to me, I just didn't think much of it. And there was a great story about, I think, Steve Sarkisian, when he was coach at USC and they fired him because he was drinking on the job or had issues. And there was a thing in the LA Times where I guess a real eager beaver reporter found a receipt that he and 2 of his coaches from an airport bar, and it was like front page news, and it was like, between the 3 of them, they had 2 pitchers of beer and 6 shots of tequila. And I was reading that and going, so, is this wrong? That's with 3 guys. So it did open my eyes to the fact that my tolerance had become heroic.
What was professional life at this time? I mean, you mentioned, you're a member in the your country club. Like obviously you're building a family at this point. What were you doing professionally, and do you think for you like some of the success that you were having in life was kind of masking like the real problem, right? I think when a lot of people think of like an addiction or an alcohol guy, like they're like, okay, this guy's on the street, or he just doesn't have his life together. You know, he's trying to piece together a couple part-time jobs just to make ends meet. They don't think about like the white collar country club guy is like, that's the alcoholic, or that's the addict. So speak to like what you were doing professionally and how, if any way, that was kind of masking, at least you're actually looking at the problem for itself.
Yeah, no, professionally. So I originally had moved out to Los Angeles after college to be a screenwriter. And, after 4 or 5 years, that wasn't working out. And so when I got married and then got a real job, and it was in sales at an up and coming tech firm. And, you know, I believe that did mask everything that was going on outside. And it was very difficult to do the things that I was doing, but I knew that I was going to do them. I mean, there was, I don't like saying a moral compass, but there was something in me that was like, no matter what happens the night before, you're getting up and you're getting your ass to work and you're going to do a good job. And that's exhausting. I'm sure I left, who knows how many millions of dollars on the table through promotions and stock options because, the people that I was working with were like, this guy's great, but can we trust him? And that became just something that weighed heavily on me because the contradiction of like, I'm going to drink all this, but at the same time, I'm going to keep my eye on the ball. I never did the leaving Las Vegas, just drive out of town and go for it. I was trying to serve two masters, so to speak, probably more. And it just became physically and emotionally exhausting, to the point where you just don't really have any feeling other than when the comfort of a tumbler of vodka is in your hand.
So do you think people were aware either at the office or even kind of in your social circles, like country club, like as people are sitting there, like here rolls up Jason, like let's put the mask on while he's here, knowing that you're gonna take a couple drinks and they're gonna be off. And then is there gossip going on behind the scenes? Like, were you aware of this at the time, or like, yeah? So just kind of socially, like, did people know?
I think that certainly where I live, drinking is a big part of life.
Okay.
So, but even so, I'm sure I stood out. There were. I think that there's this term we had, the shade tree. Like at least I'm not going to be the drunkest guy at the party. As long as there's two other guys that are, worse off than I am, I'll be fine. And there were many times where I was that shade tree for a lot of people, and that was not a source of pride. It was a source of great shame, as a matter of fact. But where I live and in the community I live, it's kind of celebrated in a way because they're so happy to see you because they're like, oh, I'll be fine tonight as long as he's here.
Yeah. Now home life as well, like, because I think for me being a bodybuilder for the decade that I did probably actually kept me out of like falling into a deep alcohol addiction. Like I told you before we hit record here, like it's been a part of my family. I've struggled with some of my own substances and obviously a 20-year addiction to pornography. But being a competitive bodybuilder, like there were points like in the year, it's like, okay, I'm in prep, like I'm just not going to have it. But when I did drink, Jason, it was just like you, right? Like there's going to be a couple drinks at the house, literally even before we're going out, just to kind of set the tone for the night. And then for me, it was chasing every single night, not blackout to the point where I passed out, but blacked out to the point where kind of like my own like conscious control just kind of went away. And I'm just kind of operating out of like, I'm not even in control of this. And it caused a lot of tension and strife in some of my relationships just because they're like, Frank, really? Like you have to drink before we even go? So for you, because you mentioned kind of that was the same thing as well. Like what was the home life like as far as the dynamic between you and your wife?
Definitely added some stress for sure. But as with work, there was something in me that I wasn't going to be ever the guy that came home and like, threw a coffee cup through the window. I was so aware of my kids, who were young, very, 5, 6, 7 years old, but I knew that they could observe and record and keep the stuff in their brain just like a Pentagon server, because that's exactly what I did. My book starts out, I think I was in kindergarten or pre-kindergarten, and I write a story about what I heard, and it was amazing to remember all the detail. So I did my best to, the tap dance. I whether it's if my kids are still awake, I'm just gonna not talk. There was things that I was doing to
Yeah.
keep my relationship with alcohol sustainable. I was like protecting it, and I knew if I ever, did the horrible things that you see sometimes or hear about, that it would have been my toy would have been taken away. So I was managing that as good as probably maybe anybody in the history of drinking has done, because it certainly wasn't this dumpster fire by any means, but it certainly was on the way towards one.
Yeah, and you made the comment at the beginning about your dad kind of having like a healthy drinking habit, and I was gonna bring this back up, and I appreciate you kind of talking about like obviously your awareness was a product of what you saw as a child, and you were able to remember that. We talk a lot to the parents on the show, both with raising awareness and dangers of internet pornography, all these kind of things, and a lot of it is like the understanding like they're going to remember like this much of what you say, like a very small part of it. What they are going to remember though is what they see. So I wanted to maybe ask you about your dad though, because you made the comment at the beginning, like he had a healthy habit. So through your life and your own struggles, like did your dad ever get his drinking under control, or what did that continue to look like through the rest of?
Well, that's a big part of the story in the book. And I guess, when I meant healthy, I guess it was more of like vigorous. He was an aggressive drinker.
Yeah, no, I knew what you meant. I didn't think you mean healthy in a good way. Like I was like your dad would be able to throw a case back like on a Saturday afternoon, like similar kind of the environment and upbringing that I came from. So I wasn't saying healthy like in a good way. Like dad could throw some back, just like you and I could throw some back in the day. I got that part.
No. Oh, so his life, from a distance, I'm sure that if my parents had not gotten divorced and I saw what was going on every day, I would have probably been horrified. But, what was really happening, and he was progressing at a very steady rate. He also had some Vietnam, extracurricular damage, to his wiring. So where I would drink, I would be more fun. There was like a nickname. Hey, it's Fun Bobby's here after my sixth beer. Of course that would, degenerate into something like, Rick or Sloppy Carl. But he just got mean, not outwardly, but inwardly. You could just see he was drinking to try and understand something that was going on inside of him that he could never figure out, because he was the only child, of, some pretty prominent farmers. He had the key to the kingdom, kind of a golden boy. And, you throw him into the jungles of Vietnam. And I think it was the first time he saw, like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't how it's supposed to be. And, as I got older and, when I'd go out and visit him when I was in high school, what I noticed is that, this isn't like having beers on the porch and cooking tri-tip steaks. This is him, diving deep into a dark pit to try and, swim through the mud and figure things out. And by, 9 o'clock with Chick Hearn doing the call at a Lakers game, he's snoring in his chair. I'm kind of like, okay, boy, this isn't that fun. And, but at the same time, I didn't look at that and go, oh man, I risk becoming that. You know, I'm different. And maybe for the reasons that I drank were different, but I started getting a sense that, when that becomes the number one priority of your day, just like, a caveman used to wake up and go, I've got to, you know, catch a dinosaur to eat, when the reward of the day becomes that first drink, that's an issue.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. So let's get back kind of to your story here, and kind of the like kind of the life changing moment, the point of like, okay, I'm going to make this definitive decision now, and then I'm going to start down this path of recovery once and for all and get clean. And obviously that leads us to the book. So you're kind of there. You're looking around family, like I got this amazing thing that I'm building and creating. At the same time, I'm super aware, like I am the alcoholic, right? Like I'm the shade tree, like you're calling for other people, or So yeah, walk us through like the inner dialogue there. Kind of when is the, the kind of the life-changing moment, and then how does that lead you through recovery? What's your experience like? What are the lessons learned? And then obviously let's get into the book.
Yeah. So when I visited the psychiatrist, and she told me, this is more than I've ever heard, almost. And it planted the seed, and she was telling me, she was like, you just got to stop. And I thought, well, that's great, thank you for that. But I didn't have a drink for a few days, and then my family, we drove up to Telluride, Colorado for a spring break trip. And I was, the whole time, it's a 17-hour drive, and I was just going over the game tape of my own life, and just kind of wondering, like, how did this happen? Why is alcohol just this, monster that never goes away? I do want to quit. I don't know. Why is it so confusing? And, I chewed on that for the entire drive, and we get there, go skiing. Now I'm about 6 days in without a drink. Of course, I'm feeling great. Skied all day, woke up early, carried all the kids' stuff, with a big smile. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go get a glass of wine. I know this little wine bar on the end of town. I'm going to go kind of shuffle off over there, like acting like I'm going to go buy t-shirts or something. And, as I was walking there, I really just started feeling this heavy weight of, do you really want to go back into this? And I just, I realized that I just didn't. I kept walking and walking, and, I kind of peeked in there, and something kept me going. And I just kind of was like lost. I was walking around town. I ended up in this kind of neighborhood street. And I really just kind of kept hearing this comforting sound, its voice. You don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to do this anymore. And it just relieved. I've never felt like love or a sense of relief like I did at that time. And I'm sitting down on this kind of park bench that's in the middle of this neighborhood, and I just, all of a sudden, it just kind of comes out, and my life is flashing kind of before my eyes, and the voice is just so calm and soothing, and it just made so much sense. You don't have to do this. Nobody is forcing me to go like have a drink. And I get up, and I feel light, and kind of airy, and I start walking back home, or to the condominium, and I look around, I look back just to kind of get my bearings, and Telluride, there's a neighborhood above the town, and this bench I sat on, I was just like, oh, there's a bench in somebody's yard, and it turns out it was in front of the First Presbyterian Church of Telluride. So I'm just like not trying to ever like question what happened, and for the longest time, I felt uncomfortable explaining it to people, because I never responded well, to people, that experience something that they can't explain. But I tell you what, I mean, from that moment, the idea of ever having a drink again, it's impossible to even comprehend. And I've, and that's even hard to say, because there's a lot of people that stop, and they want that to happen, but it doesn't happen. And I don't pretend to know why or how or what. But I've been to New York City 3 or 4 different times alone on business. I could have disappeared and had martinis all day for lunch, passed out. Nobody would have known the difference. But in that moment, or in those moments, and every moment afterwards, I just can't even imagine. And it's just this entirely new prism I'm looking through life. And so about 6 months after that, I was explaining it, trying to, to my wife. I mean, of course, everyone's like, "Oh my God, you don't drink anymore. What the hell happened?" I mean, it was like big news, and I just didn't feel like saying, "Oh yeah, I was walking around, and the hand of God came down, and He just said, 'Hey, you don't have to do this anymore. I've got more in store for you. I don't want you to do this anymore.'" And that's the story that I believe. And I don't want or care if anybody else really ever does, but I did want to tell the story, and I knew it would take the context of a book, for it to finally to make sense, namely to myself. And you have a lot of people on the show, that talk about, I guess, probably manifesting and all these things. And one of the things that occurred to me was that as I was, driving up for 17 hours and just consumed with these thoughts, I think that got me to the point where I was so exhausted and empty that I was finally able to just let God in, or let the universe in. My ego is drained. There's no energy there. I don't have any thoughts of the past and the shame. I'm just fully present. I'm sitting on a bench. My head is completely blank, and I think that's a big part of how I was able to finally listen to something that has probably been screaming at me, uh, probably since I was in third grade and drank my first beer, for all I know. So, that was the moment of clarity, I guess, is the term, but that was the magic moment. And the book "To Hell I Ride" is a play on words, of course, to Telluride. There's a little story about the city of Telluride and how back in the 1800s, when it was a up and coming gold mine town, people would go there, but it was already so rough and boisterous that a lot of Christian do-gooders would yell at the people going there, to hell you ride, trying to get them to stop. So I'm a marketing guy, so I had to it was a serendipitous playing on words, but that's the explanation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you explaining, where you kind of landed on the title and how that happened. I really appreciate you, sharing as much as you did there. I mean, obviously, your emotions, the audio people will be able to hear it. I think the ones that see the video here on YouTube will really get to feel that, right? We can obviously see that this is something that you went through, you really did experience it. But for me, there's actually even a bigger takeaway from all of that, right? Like obviously God came in, God moved. He probably had been, speaking to your entire life. And like you said, you just probably were just so caught up in your own ego and yourself and this and that, like you couldn't hear this voice that was trying to speak to you until you got out of the way. And we just had on the show a couple weeks ago, Coach Blackson, who is one of the world's leading, order speakers on the topic of surrender. And that's what I heard you say there. It's like you finally got to the point where you got Jason out of the way. You're like, you're no longer going to be able to do this by yourself. Get your ego out of the way. Stop, fully surrender, and see what else is there out there for you. But I wanted to talk about the voice that's in our head, right? Like every addict struggles with this. I did. There was a point in my story where literally I'd made the choice and commitment. I told somebody else, and I was on my way home to tell the next person I needed to know. And it was that, no, you don't need to do this. Like nobody's going to know. Just go back to this old way. And where I want to go with this, Jason, is just because we have a thought, just because we have a feeling, doesn't mean we need to entertain it. Like you had this thought in Telluride. It's like, hey, you're going 6 days strong, man. You're feeling really good. Maybe just one glass of wine isn't going to be a big deal. Maybe it's just maybe just go give yourself. Maybe you've gone 5 days. You've proven that you can control this thing. Now just go see what one would actually do to you. But you knew, or the voice knew, like, hey, no, we don't need to entertain that. So I don't know if you can maybe speak to more of like how you were in that moment, actually able to not entertain these thoughts that obviously have been a part of your life, like patterns of behavior, right? Like for 20 plus years, when the thought comes that I need a drink, the trigger is, okay, thought, trigger, action, behavior, pattern. So what was internally kind of the dialogue like at that moment? Is anything you can kind of process, take us back in time, articulate? Because this is something we all deal with, right? Every single person listening to this has that addict inside or has somebody inside that is going to, the thoughts are going to come like, we know we shouldn't be doing this, but how can we actually not act when it's been our pattern of behavior for 20 plus years?
Yes, no, the addictive voice is very strong, very clear and loud, and it's typically the one that we hear first. And when I remember very specifically, it was I'll just get one drink, and then my own voice, I said, just keep walking, and then goes get one drink, just keep walking, just get one drink, just keep walking, like a kind of like a match of tennis. And finally, I don't think I said this out loud, but in my mind, I was like, just keep walking, you asshole. Like and then that's kind of when I just went into this more of a cloudy funk. And when you're really walking or working out and you're finally just into it, you don't realize what's happening on the side of you. You're committed to walking or whatever, and there's nothing else. And it's in that kind of clarity that I stopped hearing my addictive voice, and even my own, and clearing the way for, I guess, uh, the strong voice of the universe to come in and just say, look, man, you don't have to do this anymore. And even the way, the words that I heard, they resonated with me so much, because I'd like to think that I'm logical. It wasn't something like, if rub that rock 3 times backwards, it'll magically disappear. It was like, you don't have to do this. You actually are in control. You're a man. You're a person. You get to choose. And that just opened up an entirely new world to me, and one that I'm still figuring out. Over 6 years without a drink. That everything really is, for the most part, dependent on your choice, and what you can control.
Yeah, and this gets us into really interesting conversation. I believe that you and I can really kind of bounce some things off. I get people all the time that come to me, and I'm gonna inject pornography addiction because that's the work that I do. But I believe that this is the case almost with any, whether it's a substance, behavior, or whatever. Like if we have a vice in our life that we're trying to get out of there, what's the process to quitting? And it starts with a choice, right? How do you quit porn? You make a choice today that you're gonna quit, and then you figure the rest out along the way. But it's got to start with the power of a decision, with the power of the choice. Not, I believe I'm going to try, or I think I can, or I'm going to hope that I can go without it. It's like, no, it's got to be a clear, definitive decision that I'm making today, that this is out of my life once and for all. Now, do I know how I'm going to live the rest of my life without it? No. But as men, I believe that, or like I'm very similar to you, right? Like I'm an entrepreneur, business minded. So an entrepreneur is the guy that jumps out of the plane and builds a parachute on the way down. Like we just figure things out along the way. That's the only way that I've been able to get to where I have in my life. So I carried that a lot into our recovery work. So I struggle sometimes with kind of like the addiction being labeled as a disease, like that this is something that you're born with, or you have to fully surrender yourself to it. So I'm curious with you, like, how do you kind of, view some of these things when people say like you're born with it, you're just gonna have to learn to live with it? I don't believe that. I believe we have the ability to change. But I'm just curious, kind of your take on like, is an addiction a disease? Do we need to surrender to it all completely, or just kind of your thoughts and take on all this here?
I have very strong thoughts that I've developed over that. I don't like the disease moniker either. I think gingivitis is a disease, and if you have that, does that mean you have to enter a 12-step program, admit you have this gingivitis, and then go apologize to everybody because you have bad breath? I mean, it doesn't, it just doesn't make sense logically. I get it. I'm not trying to, ruffle the feathers of the people that are, that believe this, but I think that if you're trying to quit something, arguably it could be the hardest thing you ever have to do, harder than climbing Mount Everest. So if you're sitting at camp or base camp at Mount Everest, would you go, you know what? I have no control. I'm weak. And, I better apologize to everybody before I climb this mountain. No, it's like, I'm going to do this. I'm deciding to climb that mountain. And there's absolutely nobody that can take that away from me. I can decide to not climb the mountain. I can do that, but I can also decide to do it. And I think that where the disease concept gets muddled is I look, I'm not a scientist, but I believe that there is a little genetic code in there that some cells respond better. I think that dopamine levels get triggered easier in some people. I get that, but that's not a disease. That's
a predisposition, right? To certain behavioral patterns. Obviously that's a genetic code, but then you go beyond and above that, you now have epigenetics, the ability to actually change your own internal genes. When we talk about the brain wiring, like I've interviewed some of the world's leading neuroscientists, and what's so incredible is we all have this thing called neuroplasticity, right? It's the ability for it's the brain's ability to change through experience over time. And honestly, a lot of this research is new. I think they just discovered neuroplasticity, maybe late 80s, maybe even early 90s. So we're talking 20, 30 years. So I think some of the addiction community needs to catch up with modern day science because, yeah, maybe prior to the 80s, we didn't understand that we could actually change the neurochemistry of our brain, but we can now. We can literally reprogram our dopamine center. We can reprogram these neural pathways. We can get above and beyond genetics through epigenetics and change some of these predispositions with these patterns of behavior. So yeah, I'm right in line here with you. So for you, like, was it the choices made and then it was just clean, or were there like components of real recovery that you had to put yourself through? And what were some of those steps like in your life?
I didn't do any of, I guess, the steps. I stopped. My dad and I had a very complicated relationship. He did AA a number of times. I didn't, there were things like when he finally died, I will never forget this. I was cleaning out his house and, he had the big book and the workbook, and it was like, maybe 1/10 done. It just, there's a context there for me that thought, what, it didn't work for him. I think the failure rate is like 30% anyway. So what's the point? And honestly, I just didn't have any need, not the right word, but I didn't have the taste for alcohol. I didn't need to go talk to people and say, how am I going to get through today? And again, I just want to be super respectful of, AA, everything it does, the community. But I think it's also okay to go, what? I just want to think differently about this, and like from the neuroplasticity standpoint, if you woke up every day and touched a burning stove, you know you'd probably stop doing it. And so what's different between a bottle of scotch and the burning stove? They both are very bad for you. They create pain. So why would you keep doing that? And I choose to believe that God made certain people allergic to things like, be it alcohol or porn or any kind of addiction, hoping that you'd get the message early on, like, hey, guess what? You're allergic to alcohol, so drink it because I have actually a lot more in store for you. So, just like if you were allergic to peanuts, you wouldn't gobble them down, unless you had a lot of self-loathing, and that's a whole nother thing that could be a psychological truth. The whole self-sabotage uh, ways of the human psyche, where when things are good.
Yeah, you're getting into kind of some psychoanalytic stuff now, and obviously our belief system and all that. We've done a lot of shows there. I'm curious with you, so there was no real struggle, in terms of a recovery. We made a choice, made a decision. So how did life change? Like, how did life improve? Like, what did you begin to experience, see, like navigate? Like, talk us through like the difference in both your world and the way in what you saw and how you actually began to show up and how other people perceived you.
Yeah, I mean, that is it's difficult. And I think one thing that I would say to anybody that's hoping that by stopping drinking life's going to be just great, to not think that. I think that what you realize is, okay, you wake up in the morning, you feel great, but if you're not really comfortable with that person looking you back in the mirror, then you still have work to do. So there's going to be that manic couple of months where you're like, oh my god, I'm losing weight, I'm waking up without an alarm, my skin's clear. But at some point, the wheel of life just keeps spinning, and you have to start figuring out how to deal with issues, and most importantly, fill that block of time that was dedicated to your bad habit. In my case, that was 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. nearly every day. And that's a challenge. And I tell you, when I just talking to other people who have stopped, that's the number one concern, is that they're like, I'm just gonna be so bored. There's no way. And so I was just at that point where, oh yeah, I was bored. And there are, to this day, there's many times where, my phone's not ringing on Saturday night and I'm sitting at home with my dog, and everybody else is having the time of their life. But I've just learned to realize, like, this is life. And if you are bored, learn something to do, meet new people, have new conversations, take a dance class, all these things. There's so many things that we could all be doing, and also just be comfortable doing nothing. Just because you get an addiction out of the way doesn't mean you now have to save the world and make your mark. You know,
Yeah, no, I actually think you're answering my previous question. Like when I asked you about, kind of your steps of recovery, like I wasn't saying like, did you go through the 12 steps, like the acknowledgement of a higher power, the admittance of your guilt, the, reconciliation of relationships. Like I know you weren't a 12-step guy, but I think what you're speaking to here and the way that I see this was your recovery, right? Like what I talk about is the only path to overcoming, once again, insert pornography addiction, is to become the man that's no longer addicted to porn. But you can remove pornography and insert any word in there. The only path, in my opinion, to overcome any compulsive or addictive behavior is to become the person or become the man that no longer has that compulsive or addictive behavior. And rooted in that becoming of that new individual, I believe, is an identity change, right? When you look in the mirror, you're not happy with the individual that's looking back. Well, that's the signal and sign that, hey, you need to change who you are so that when you do look in there, not only you're excited, but you're actually really fired up because this guy is actually out there doing good in the world and is creating impact. So I believe that you actually did, if this is what you're telling me, you went through this process, then you get to go through an element of some type of recovery. So for you, what was that process like? How did you, begin to find these new hobbies? How did you begin to change who you're looking back at when you look at yourself in the mirror?
Great clarity around that. And when I think of like recovery, I kind of like to use the word discovery. I'm in discovery, because what I'm done recovering. I stopped drinking, so my hangover's gone. There's no more recovery for me. I'm done.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to discover all of the things that I had been missing or wasn't able to put all my attention to. And I'm a big whiteboard guy, and I was, either the whiteboard in my mind or the one I was actually using, but I was kind of making circles and, the Venn diagrams and all that, boring stuff. But the first thing I realized was that, oh my God, these three kids of mine, they deserve my very best without question. They don't have any context. They never saw me, wreck the buffet at the country club or so to speak. These are the ones that, my friend and I, who stopped drinking around the same time, we talk about our decision to quit as, we made the diving catch because our kids were just getting to that age where they're watching like hawks and, they're learning how to do things like that. And so I've taken a lot of pleasure in just being the very best dad I can be, and there's, it's not a transactional relationship, that it is. I mean, I think that if somebody stops drinking and they go on to cure cancer, they go to their 30th class reunion, anybody that knew them as a drinker is still going to think, oh yeah, I remember that time he wrecked the bus. Oh my God. Yeah. I think he went to the bathroom in his pants. People, they don't want to ever let go of the worst version they have of you because they want to have that control, that center of power. And as ugly as that sounds, you can almost admit to yourself you do it too. It's hard for, even if it's not intentional, but the first thing you think of when you see somebody that has done a lot of things and created a pattern behavior, you can't help yourself. You don't know what they're doing now. And I think that's, it's something that you can't worry about. There were times, up until maybe a year ago where, I'd walk in and see a bunch of people I know and they're like, oh, hey, cocktail. They would call me by like an old nickname. And I would just, I'd get so like flush with anger and shame until finally I had to realize I'm like, I don't have any control over what they call you. I mean, if I start doing something else, are they going to call me, oh, hey, gardener? It's just like,
Yeah. So let me ask you, like, were there people or circles like you had to completely remove yourself out of? I'm asking this for a very specific reason because this is actually a part of our recovery curriculum. like in week one, it's like you got to purge all your belongings and possession. You got to get rid of the access and entry point. So if you've downloaded videos, or once again, just talking about porn here, but insert whatever behavior or addiction here. So you got to just get rid of the access to it. Then you got to audit your circle. If there's people in your life that maybe served you in that addictive kind of season of your life, and they're not going to serve you as becoming the better version of yourself, there's no problem, or there's no shame in kicking people out of your life. Like, it's okay. You're like, your friends don't need to be your friends forever. And I believe this. Like, I've had to do this multiple times in my life. I had to stop going to get my haircut at one place because every time I showed up, she's like, Frank, I don't like how you keep becoming a different version. I was like, well, I'm not going to be the same person that you started cutting my hair 5 years ago. And it got to a point where it's like, I could only hear that same thing 3 times in a row. And I'm like, I'm just going to find somebody else to cut my hair. So yeah, our circle, like we don't need to keep people around. So for you, was that anything you had to go through or walk out?
I think there was a lot of natural selection happening where I didn't really have to do much pruning. I think that once you stop drinking, then, people who drink, they don't want to be around you anymore, and I used to find that a little, troubling, offensive, made me sad. But, at the end of the day, if you decide to stop doing something for whatever reason, you're choosing a new path, doesn't mean everybody else is going to be interested or supportive.
Yeah.
Like, if somebody came to me and said, you know what, I'm going to go all in on stamp collecting. I mean, I ain't going to do this thing all the way. I'm not going to be like, cool, let me go to the, Civic Center with you and walk around and look at stamps. And so if that person would get offended, that's how silly it would be for somebody like me to get offended that somebody doesn't want to go, try a yoga class instead of, going to happy hour.
Well, here's an interesting kind of sidebar from there. Was there anybody, because you were kind of like the social guy, right? Like, Jason was here, like, it's going to be a good time. Like, so is there anybody, once you took the step, once you took the plunge, you're like, anybody can't pull you aside, Jason, thank you so much, man. Because by you doing this has actually forced me to look inside of myself, and I'm committed now to doing so. Obviously, your book, I'm sure that's why you're doing it, right? It's to inspire as many people as you potentially can. But was there anybody directly in the circle, even before getting the book out there, and even before even sharing the message, just by seeing you? Did that happen?
Yeah. Earlier in the writing process, I had like second draft done, and I had a dear friend who happens to be an avid reader, and I asked her, hey, could you read this? Let's just see if I'm on to something. And, she, I would say, drank like I did, like no big problems in life, but, when it's go time, it's go time. And we're going to finish this job once we start it. And she responded within a week how much it meant to her, how great it was. And 6 months later, she did stop drinking, and then cited the book as a reason. And so I go, that's all I need. And if it can scale, even better. And I think it was just there's so many books that are written, about the experience of drinking and whatnot, and so many great ones, but I never read the one that resonated with me, with the kind of a little humorous, a little dark, but truthful. I wanted something for my generation, Gen X, 90s, all that stuff. And, when I was writing it and looking back, I didn't, there were certainly things that brought great shame, great regret. But at the same time, I was writing it from a place where, all I have to do is look into my eyes of my kids. And I know that everything that happened before brought me to this moment. It could have been some of the dumb stuff, some of the lucky stuff, some of the determined stuff, but here I am. And there's no regrets, there's still a little simmering shame, but that's kind of gone now. And it's just that process of, you're in the process of discovery. And, each day it's almost like waking up, coming out of a bomb shelter, like looking around and going, what is cool? What's fun to do? Who's supportive? Who's nice? And sadly, you're not going to find a lot of that in the people that you knew. I've heard some of my, best friends say, without knowing that I heard, that, gosh, I wish I liked Jason so much more when he drank. I mean, really? I mean, I get it. It's kind of funny banter, but I mean, if you really peel back the onion on that statement, it's like, well, they really liked the guy that hated himself so much that he was trying to obliterate his personality every time he was around you.
Yeah, I see it a completely different way, Jason. I see that as not even, it's got nothing to do with Jason. That's a subconscious, unlimiting or limiting belief in and of themselves, that they see somebody that has taken the steps to improve themselves that they're not willing to do. So instead of saying, hoorah, congratulations for this guy, let's pull him back down. I just had an event a couple weeks ago, and the speaker gave this talk on a couple different animals. It was an event for entrepreneurs and business owners, and he tells this story of a bucket of crabs, right? And I forget the original story. I'm going to kind of try to piece it together. Hopefully, I get the point across. But there's a young man, and he's with a fisherman, and there's a bucket of crabs sitting on the ground next to them. And one of the crabs starts climbing to the top of the bucket, and the boy goes, "Sir, you need to get this. One of your crabs is about to escape." The fisherman's like, "Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay." He's like, "No." He's like getting close to the top. He's got his claws now on the top. He's starting to pull himself up. He's like, "Trust me, son. Just keep watching. We're going to be okay." Keeps going. He's like, "Sir, no." He's half his body out. What ends up happening is inside of a bucket of crabs, like the minute they see one of their fellow mates like beginning to leave, all the crabs come and pull him back down. And this is where we talk about it. So powerful. Like, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. You are the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. We all have these crabs in our life. The minute they see you begin to take off, it's not hoorah, congratulations. It's, man, we really like that other version of yourself a lot better. It's got nothing to do with you. It's all in their own subconscious internal beliefs about they don't want to look at themselves. They don't want to expose themselves to their shortcomings and how they can improve. So they'd rather just suck you back down to their level. So I appreciate sharing that story. Hopefully the way that I reframe that maybe helps a lot of people expose some of the crabs that we all have in our lives. Because I think we all do. I love the language you use with the discovery though. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, to your point, I think that once you're sober or rid of whatever habit that's been kind of hurting your focus, it's pretty simple. If somebody is in your life is not pushing you forward, you push them away. It's as simple as that. And
especially as men, right? Iron sharpens iron. Like we need men that are going to challenge us in every area of our life. Like, you're not showing up for your kids. You got to have somebody that's going to challenge you. Hey, Jason, like, your little ones need you. You're not being the full man that you're capable of becoming. You show up to the gym. You've been kicking a few back, or you've been taking it a little easy on the diet. You need those fellas. You need those brothers, and be like, dude, we're busting our ass every week in here. You're not holding up your side of the bargain. Look at this roles, financially side. So we need these people not only to elevate us and push us up, but sometimes challenge us in areas when we're not fully living up to our potential. And that's why I loved your language of discovery, like addiction discovery. Coming back to a lot of what we talk about, we help men become the men they were created to be. Well, if you were created to be something, then it's your job to discover who you're created to be. So, one of the big takeaways for me, Jason, is I'm going to steal this. It's probably going to be somewhere in the title of the show. I hope you're okay with me using some of this language, because I really do love the way that you framed everything you talked about there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're right. With men, it is very difficult. And if you think of the team concept, that we all grew up on a team, and Little League Baseball, if, Charlie didn't hustle for the ball, it was okay for us and the coach to kind of yell at him, get him pumped up, get him back in line. But at some point, we all kind of lose our team, lose our coach. And so it's up to ourselves in many ways, maybe it's more me. But I have found that, if you even take it down a notch, and I understand, the people that don't want to celebrate you. And here's the crap thing is, like, if I'm, at the gym, or, I'm not a big worker outer, I like to, run and stuff. But, if there's a guy my age and he's ripped and he's already finished his like 8-hour workout or something, and I'm like, just getting out of bed, I'm not like, oh yeah, that's great. I'm a little jealous, but I catch myself, and go, that would be a better thing to do, and I try to use that to motivate myself. And I think that, re-engineering the mind with, neuroplasticity and whatnot for behaviors, but it's also with how you treat people around you, that are close. I mean, it's all capable of being rewired and rethought. And it's just the effort and the work and the uncomfortableness of doing that stops a lot of people.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, you don't tell the guy, that's already got his workout in by the time you're waking up, like, hey, you should have slept in like I did. Like, yeah, you're probably a little like, I don't even know if it's jealousy. It's probably more of like, you're capable of more, man. Like you
Yeah,
really are. Like
it's
it's and I think that's the change. Like that's the change in the way that you think. That's the change in the way that you look at yourself. It's like I am capable of so much more than I'm living up to. So hopefully that message came across here pretty clear. I really enjoyed your story, and I think that there's a lot that people can walk away with. We've obviously mentioned the book here a few times. So tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us kind of who you wrote it for. Is it for the person struggling through alcohol? Is it written for the person struggling through addiction, or is it for anybody? And then tell them where they can find it, pick it up, and then we'll drive their conversation home here with our last question.
You bet. No, so the book, it was not written specifically for the addicted person. I just wanted to tell more of a universal story. I'm very cinematic, so I think of it as like a boyhood meets leaving Las Vegas by way of Scrooged. And so it's just a look back, and the best feedback that I've received thus far, besides the one friend of mine who said this is what kind of spearheaded my decision to stop, is that, people that are 75 years old, doctors that I've known my whole life, they've read it and they're just like, this is such an incredibly fun story to read. And, or when people come up to me and say, I'm not even a reader, and I read it in 2 sittings. And so that makes me feel better than almost anything, because it means that I hit the note that I was trying to hit, which is a relatable, entertaining story about a pretty normal everyday guy that got caught in alcohol's jaws and somehow got out. And so the book it's told in a linear fashion, and it just picks moments, 5 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, high school, college, that when I look at it now, you can see all the red flags. And so if somebody else was drinking or whatnot, never really thought about it, they could read my book and go, oh my gosh, there's a lot of similarities here. I remember my first time in college. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and there's just no judgment, there's no advice, because I don't pretend to know anything about quitting, other than the fact that what, you can, all you have to do is decide. So I'm leaving it up for people to read it, and just think about things in their own way and act on it in a way they want to, whether that's throwing it away or writing a review on Amazon and passing it on to a friend. That part is out of my control.
Yeah, that's great, brother, and we appreciate you, writing it. Obviously, your background, a little bit of time you spent, in screenwriting, I'm sure probably helps and contributed to, to being, a powerful story that people can follow along with and walk away with not just, an insightful story, but an entertaining one as well. So available on Amazon, anywhere else people can find it, and then where can they connect with you? Where you hanging out socially, online, on any of the platforms, anywhere?
Yeah, so everything, it's on Amazon. It's in a few independent bookstores and whatnot, but everybody just go to Amazon. That's the best place. They can get it quicker. And I do have a website, I'm sorry, thejasoncarter.com. And that's a place to start, where I'm putting a little bit of content that I'm creating just for messaging on the book. But I'm really trying to find out what's more valuable to people that would actually visit it right now. As you have done, and you've created this show, I feel like there's a little bit more inside baseball I would like to share with folks. And so that would be a good place to come and hang out. If you like the book and you like the tone of it, that's kind of what you're going to get, if you follow me on Instagram, or some of the stuff that'll end up my site.
Yeah. What's next? What are you excited about? I mean, do you foresee this leading to bigger things, or is kind of like, I just needed to get this out there and trust and have faith that it'll get to where it needs to get to?
Yeah, I really want to put everything I have behind it, not in terms of just like book sales, but I mean, it's the first thing I've really done that I love it. I think it's, it took me a couple of years. I really put the time in, and I think it's a good book. So I want to get behind it and see where it goes. But earlier as we were talking, what's the greatest thing that's come out of this is just meeting new people that have interesting ideas. I was listening to your podcast with Bulletproof, Dave Asprey, and I mean that is so awesome. I've listened to him on some other shows, and yet your conversation with him was interesting and going down different avenues and paths. And man, I could sit there and either listen to that or talk about that stuff all day. I love fasting. Fasting is amazing, and it's very similar to drinking. It's like, man, if you fast, you will start seeing benefits. But you know what? Everybody you tell is fasting, they're going to go, you know what? Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and they're going to let all these things, get in your way. And then when you do have the pancake breakfast, your day's ruined. So you get to decide every morning, are you going to have oatmeal with honey and bananas with peanut butter stirred in, or are you going to have a cup of coffee and just wait till lunch? And, I would say that 5 times a week I choose to fast, and the 2 days I don't, I regret it, So nobody's perfect.
Yeah. And I'll tell, because this has been a conversation centered around addiction and, kind of breaking chains and working through compulsive behaviors. Like you want to get a behavior out of your life that you're struggling with, start fasting. Like learn to deny yourself from the food, an actual energy source for life. Cut yourself off there first. You'll quickly realize like these other things that feel like they're compulsions and you need them a part of your life quickly begin to fizzle out. It's really powerful how some of these disciplines of willpower carry over into other areas of our life. So this has been an amazing conversation, Jason. I appreciate you for what you do, for putting the book out there, for coming on here, for sharing as much as you did, getting emotional. Like I said, I know the audience is really going to resonate with the part, both on the audio side, because you could really hear the emotions coming through. But those of you that are watching here on YouTube, I hope you really were paying attention when you're sharing that part of that story. So last question, Jason, we like to end every single episode with. Obviously, the title of the show is The Superhuman Life, right? And the genesis of this podcast is my own recovery story. And it's getting to the point where I realize or I believe that, we're all put on this earth for a purpose. There's a calling on each one of our lives. We're here for a very specific reason. But if that's all you do is you just believe that you're here for a purpose, but you don't actually take intentional action, that's not living a superhuman life. For me, living a superhuman life is you're clear on what your purpose and mission is, but then you're aggressively attacking it every single day through the development of your body, through the development of your mind, through the development of your service and work and how you create good for the people in the world. So that's what I define as living a superhuman life. I like to end every single episode here with getting the guest take. So Jason Carter, as we end today's conversation, how would you define living a superhuman life?
I've come to believe that, the ultimate feeling that we can experience is just the purest form of love. And, you typically only get that because if what you're reflected, I guess what you're putting out is always reflected right back at you. And so if you're intentional about finding and feeling good love, that's going to really direct you in the right path, no matter what you're doing. And it's a hard thing to do. Of course, we all go to Starbucks and get in line, and there's somebody that's paying with like change out of a water jar, and you're like, no. But if you can start, sharpening that groove of, just I want to put out as much love as I can. Doesn't matter if I'm a banker or a, repairman or baseball player. Just start with that and start seeing what comes back, and then use that great clean energy to then be superhuman and do whatever the hell you want.
Love that, brother. Love that so much. I was having a conversation with a colleague earlier today, and we're just kind of talking about some things that are kind of happening both of our lives. And I could easily have been wrestled with something that's going on, but I've optimized my life for peace, man. And that's something I've landed on here very recently. And hearing you talk about that, that change in the Starbucks, or this is when I get all the time, like in one of my men's group. It's like the guy that leads the group, incredibly successful man, built multiple businesses, leads this powerful group on a Saturday morning. For some reason, he can't get past people cutting him off in traffic. It riles him up. And I'm like, brother Ron, like your life is amazing, man. You should be at such peace. Like, who cares where they're cutting you off? First of all, where are you going that you're in such a rush? So I love that example there. Love is the ultimate form of service and good for the world. So Jason, brother, thank you so much for your time here today. Thank you for your book. Guys, check it out on Amazon, To Hell I Ride. We'll get that link down there below. Connect with Jason. And guys, if you're new here, this is your first episode. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're a returning listener, guys, we have seen tremendous growth. This show is taking off, and it's all because of you. So if you want to continue to help us get this message out there, most important, today's message, right? People need to hear this. You can support the show in one of two ways. First off, leave us a 5-star rating and written review, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, whatever the platform you guys are listening to. Those rating reviews drive new listeners, drive new eyeballs to the show. But most importantly today, if there's somebody that is in your life and needs to hear this story, needs to hear this message, do us a favor, but do them the blessing of sharing today's conversation with them. But for Jason Carter, To Hell I Ride, Frank Rich, Superhuman Life, we love you guys. And we'll see you next week.